In 334 BC, Alexander, king of Macedonia, began one of the greatest military campaigns in history against the superpower of the age, the Persian Empire. Just 20 years old, his brilliant and fearless leadership won him battle after battle. And in an astonishing tenure campaign that took him to the edge of the known world, he carved out one of the largest empires ever known. Few men have had such a massive impact on the course of history. To the Persians, he was Alexander the Accursed. But to the West, he was immortalized as Alexander the Great, ancient Greece. From around 500 BC, this rugged land was the scene of remarkable developments. Its two greatest city-states were Athens, a naval power where democracy, art, drama, and philosophy flourished, and Sparta, an austere militaristic society, famed. In 480 BC, these two city-states had joined forces to fight an invasion at the narrow pass of Thermopylae. A small Greek force, led by 300 Spartans, held up the enormous Persian army for 3 days, before they were finally encircled and killed. Then, in the Straits of Salamis, the Greek fleet defeated the Persian navy, but they couldn't prevent the Persians burning the sacred temples of the Athenian Acropolis. The next year at Plataea, the Greeks won a decisive land battle against the Persians and forced them to abandon their invasion. The next 50 years were the golden age of classical Greece, but rising tension between Athens and Sparta and their allies eventually dragging the Greek world into decades of destructive fighting. Wars between the Greek city-states continued for almost a century, leaving them exhausted and vulnerable to a new rising power to the north. For centuries, sophisticated Greeks had viewed the mountainous kingdom of Macedonia as a backwater Hicksville. But under King Philip II, Macedonia emerged as a formidable military force. His most famous reform, the introduction of the sarissa, an 18-foot pike twice the length of a normal Greek spear, and wielded by trained infantry fighting in close formation known as a phalanx. In 338 BC at the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip's army crushed the joint forces of Thebes and Athens. Through alliance and conquest. Now, following this victory, he united all Greece in an alliance known as the Hellenic League. Only Sparta stood aside. Philip began to plan a great campaign, a Panhellenic, or all-Greek war against the Persian Empire. Their old foe was now an ailing superpower, its great riches ripe for the taking. But on the eve of launching his war, Philip was assassinated by his own bodyguard. Victim of Macedonia's brutal court rivalries, he was succeeded by his 20-year-old son, Alexander. Brilliant, tutored by the great philosopher Aristotle, and already an experienced military commander, Alexander inherited his father's grand plan to invade Persia, but first he had to secure his own position as king. At home, he had potential rivals executed, then crushed rebellions in Illyria Thessaly, and central Greece. He made a special example of Thebes, completely destroying the ancient city and selling its people into slavery. In the spring of 334 BC, now ready to launch his war against the Persian Empire, Alexander led his army across the Hellespont into Asia Minor. It was the start of one of the greatest military campaigns in history. Alexander's army was about 40,000 strong, drawn from all parts of Greece. The infantry were commanded by the veteran Macedonian general. In the front rank, 9,000 Macedonian phalangists, armed with the 18-foot. These were professional soldiers, well-trained and drilled, who formed up for battle in the phalanx. This packed formation presented a solid wall of iron spear tips and was virtually unstoppable. But it was also difficult to maneuver and highly vulnerable to attacks on its flanks or rear. So 3,000 elite infantry, the hypospists, or shield-bearers, they were commanded by Parmenian's son, Nicator. The second line of Alexander's army was made up of 7,000 Greek allies, armed as hoplites. They took their name from the hoplon, their large round shield, and carried shorter 8-foot spears. A hoplite phalanx was not as effective as the Macedonian phalanx, but still well armed and heavily armored for the time.